Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our job here is to take the most critical, complex information hitting your desk and turn it into actionable, well-understood knowledge. Today, we're stepping right into what is probably the most intense scenario in modern cybersecurity, the zero-day crisis.
It really is. It's that moment the security updates drop, but you already know the vulnerability is being exploited out there in the wild.
The race has already started, and you're behind.
Exactly. The frustration is knowing the patch exists, but the damage is already happening. And the specifics of this one make it particularly, well, troubling. We're talking about a flaw found deep inside a core Windows component that most people, even seasoned IT pros, probably didn't realize was active on their systems.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. Our mission today is a deep analysis of a recent, highly critical alert from CISA. We're talking about CVE 2025-62221. And this isn't some peripheral issue in a third-party app. This is a kernel-level flaw that affects, well, virtually every modern Windows installation. We are going to dissect the devastating technical mechanics of this zero-day, quantify the immediate business risks it presents to your organization, and lay out the multi-layered, non-negotiable action plan required for rapid preemption and navigation of this crisis.
In our sources for this, we're looking at Microsoft's detailed December 2025 Patch Tuesday notes, the CISA alerts from December 9th, and a lot of subsequent threat intelligence analysis. They all confirm a scenario of extreme urgency.
No extreme.
So extreme that federal agencies were given a hard mandatory remediation deadline, December 30th, 2025. That 3-week window for a widespread critical fix tells you exactly how high the perceived risk is at the national level.
Okay, and if we boil down the threat, the core conflict is this. We are dealing with a local privilege escalation bug, an EOP bug. Now, this immediately raises a question for me. A 7.8 CVSS score. In the world of triage, that often gets sidelined in favor of, the big 9.8 remote code execution flaws. Why should a CISO prioritize this EOP bug that requires an attacker to already be logged onto the system?
That's the fundamental question, and it really shifts priorities. The danger here isn't about getting the initial access. Your other security layers are supposed to handle that. The danger is the reliability and the speed of the jump from a low-level foothold to full system access.
So a minor breach becomes a major one.
Instantly.
Instantly. As we've seen confirmed in the analyses, an initial breach, maybe a low-privilege employee clicking a phishing link or a minor drive-by download, is immediately escalated. Elevation of privilege bugs are the golden keys. They turn a localized incident into a full breach. If you gain system, you are positioned for total domain dominance, regardless of where you started. So it's not just a security breach. It's an infrastructure takeover waiting to happen. That context makes this deep dive absolutely vital. Okay, let's start at the source then.
Yeah.
Where exactly does this critical flaw, CVE 2025-62221, live? And why is its location so concerning for every single Windows user?
The vulnerability resides in a file called cldflt.ss. This is the Windows Cloud Files mini filter driver. Now, that name might sound a bit esoteric, but its function is crucial, and more importantly, its location is deep inside the OS.
Walk us through what a mini filter driver actually is. I feel like that's jargon that immediately loses people.
Okay, let's break it down. Think of the operating system kernel as ring 0. That's the deepest, most privileged layer, the absolute core. Drivers that live here are critical. A mini filter driver is essentially a small, highly privileged piece of software that can intercept and even modify file system operations before the main operating system gets to handle them.
So it's like a security guard for file access.
In a way, yes. Its specific job here, the cloud files part, is what integrates cloud synchronization services, like Microsoft's own OneDrive or a third-party service like Google Drive, seamlessly into your Windows Explorer.
So that's what lets me see and interact with files that are technically stored miles away, but it just looks like they're in a folder on my local hard drive.
Exactly that. It manages all the caching, the metadata, the little placeholder or stub files that represent that remote data. Now, here is the critical point that makes this flaw so pervasive.
Okay.
You might be thinking, well, I don't use OneDrive, or my company blocks cloud sync services, so we're safe.
Right, that was my first thought.
But the sources explicitly confirm that this driver, cldflt.ss, is loaded and enabled by default on virtually all modern Windows installations.
All of them.
Windows 10, Windows 11, and the relevant server versions like 2019 and 2022. It's bundled as an integral component of the operating system package, regardless of whether you've installed a third-party cloud app or even what your user preferences are.
That dramatically expands the scope. We're not talking about a niche piece of software anymore. We're talking about an inherent exposure on the entire global fleet of Windows machines dating back years.
It's massive. If your machine is running a modern version of Windows and it's connected to a network, this component is present, it's running in kernel mode, and it's ready to be exploited if it hasn't been patched.
Let's get specific about the flaw itself. CVE 2025-62221 is classified as a use after free, or UAF, issue. We touched on the CVSS score of 7.8, but let's justify that high priority designation. Detail the key exploit metrics for us.
Right, when you're assessing a vulnerability, the base score is important, but it's the vector metrics that tell the real story of how reliable and dangerous it is. This bug has an attack vector rated as local. As you mentioned, this means it requires initial authenticated access. The attacker needs to be logged in, even with the lowest possible level of user access.
So it's not that internet-facing firewall vulnerability that keeps admins up at night.
No, but look at what follows. The privileges required is rated low. A standard user account is all that's necessary.
Every single employee login, every contractor account, every kiosk station login, they all provide the necessary access level.
Exactly. And then the metric that makes this a zero-day champion is user interaction, which is rated none.
No user interaction. That means no further social engineering required. Once I, as an attacker, am logged on, I don't need to trick the user into clicking something or opening a malicious file in a specific folder.
It's a silent programmatic jump to power. The attacker can execute this exploit silently, at will, and because of the underlying technical reliability of the flaw, they can expect near-perfect success against vulnerable systems.
So that combination
of low privileges, low complexity, and no user interaction means the moment initial access is achieved, the path to system is wide open and highly reliable.
And the urgency here is really defined by that zero-day status. This wasn't a theoretical bug found by a researcher. It was a confirmed, actively exploited tool in the wild before the patch ever arrived.
Absolutely. CISA added it to their known exploited vulnerabilities, the KEV catalog, on December 9th. Microsoft released the official fix on December 10th.
A one-day gap.
A one-day gap publicly, but who knows how long it was used before that. This tight timeline means defenders were already behind the curve. They had to prioritize an immediate patch for a flaw that, at the moment the patch dropped, was already being used in active attacks.
Now, this fix was rolled out alongside dozens of others in the December Patch Tuesday cycle. The sources noted another zero-day was present, CVE 2025-54100, which was a PowerShell RCE. Why did CISA and the analysts deem this one, 622221, the primary concern?
The comparison really highlights the severity of kernel escalation. The PowerShell RCE bug, while certainly dangerous, was centered on remote execution that likely required some form of social engineering to trigger the initial code execution path. And crucially, it was not confirmed to be actively exploited when the reports were written. CVE 2025-62221, however, is a confirmed, actively exploited EOP flaw that grants kernel access instantly. For a sophisticated attacker, an EOP bug like this is pure gold. It guarantees persistence and evasion after they achieve that initial access. It's the difference between a high-risk entry method and a highly reliable final takeover step.
That clarity helps a lot. It forces us to think beyond just preventing the door from opening and to focus on what happens when the burglar is already inside the house. We've established that this is a critical, widespread, and actively exploited bug. Now let's tackle the deep technical details. How does this use after free flaw, this UAF, actually work inside the Windows kernel? We need to explain this core issue, CWE 416, without overwhelming our sophisticated learner.
Let's use an analogy from memory management. Imagine the kernel is running a large, highly efficient warehouse. The cldflt.sys driver, our cloud files mini filter, needs to handle a specific shipping request, maybe processing the metadata for a file sync. It requests a temporary loading doc, that's memory allocation, using a function like xAllocatePoolWithTag. When it's done, it's supposed to signal that the doc is free and available for reuse, using a function like xFreePoolWithTag.
And that's usually a reliable process, right? It ensures memory isn't wasted.
It is, but in a use-after-free scenario, the driver's logic, its state machine, makes a critical mistake. It correctly signals the memory is free, the doc is empty, but somewhere in its internal tracking, it keeps an old address marker, what we call a dangling pointer, pointing back to that now freed location. The system now thinks that memory is available for anyone to rent, but our driver still has a faulty map pointing to it.
So the moment that memory is freed, an attacker can jump in and rent that specific location before anyone else does.
Exactly. That's the race. The attacker executes operations designed to allocate or spray that specific freed kernel memory address with their own controlled malicious data. This is difficult, but it's very achievable for skilled threat actors. Once they've rented that space, they trigger a subsequent file operation that causes the vulnerable driver logic to try and use that lingering, dangling pointer. But instead of pointing to benign data, it now points directly into the attacker's controlled payload.
And that manipulation allows them to achieve what's called arbitrary read-write primitives. They can suddenly read and write to privileged memory locations they shouldn't even know exist.
Precisely. And because this is all happening inside a driver in kernel mode, in Ring 0, this exploitation grants the attacker the highest possible level of control. System privileges.
Ring 0 access.
Ring 0 access means unrestricted power over the entire operating system. It lets you bypass all user-level security features like user account control or UAC and all the integrity-level checks.
That is a core difference between a user-level vulnerability and a kernel-level one. One breaks an application, the other owns the whole machine. Now, we noted that while a mistake here might just cause a blue screen of death, sophisticated attackers are silent.
They have to be precise. The initial challenge in exploiting kernel flaws is often stability. You don't want to crash the machine you're trying to take over. But the fact that this specific vulnerability is actively exploited confirms the existence of reliable, stable exploit chains. We've seen this pattern historically with similar mini-filter bugs.
Well, this isn't the first time.
Not at all. For example, a related flaw, CVE 2024-21338, demonstrated how attackers efficiently combine a remote code execution vulnerability to get the initial foothold, and then they use an EOP like this one to solidify their system access. It's a factory floor of compromise.
Let's follow that factory floor. Take us through the precise steps the technical reports outline for the exploitation chain, from that initial trigger to the full system takeover.
The process starts with a hyper-specific trigger. So step 1, triggering the vulnerability. The attacker, logged on with those low privileges, sends a specially malformed input-output control command, an IOCTL.
Wait, what's an IOCTL command in this context? Break that down.
An IOCTL, or input-output control command, is essentially an internal, structured message that user mode applications send to kernel mode device drivers to request specific operations. Think of it as calling the driver on its internal phone line and asking it to perform a specific privileged task. The attacker targets the driver using the device IO control Windows API call, sending a crafted IOCTL, potentially related to file sync controls like FSCTL Cloud, SYNC, or maybe the specific IOCTL 0x2220C0 that was identified in some analysis.
And this command is designed to do what?
It's designed to interact with the memory allocation logic just enough to create that UAF condition, to make the driver free the memory but forget to delete the map.
Okay, so that command executes, the memory is freed, but the pointer remains. That leads us to step 2.
Step 2 is memory corruption. After the UAF is set, the attacker executes controlled memory manipulation techniques. It's a process often called heap feng shui, to allocate their malicious data into that exact, newly freed kernel memory location. Once that's achieved, the dangling pointer now points directly at the attacker's data structure. This is how they transition from an unstable UAF condition to a stable, reliable, arbitrary read-write primitive.
Okay, so now they can write anything, anywhere in kernel memory. What's the most valuable target?
That's step 3, the EOP payload. The most valuable target is usually the security context of their own process.
Our own process.
Yes. They corrupt critical kernel structures, specifically the security token objects associated with their own low-privilege process. By rewriting that token object, it's like editing the digital passport of their running program, they can impersonate the system user. This provides the highest integrity level and bypasses UAC completely, granting them instantaneous access to any resource on the machine.
They didn't need a password. They just needed to edit the operating system's internal identity verification system.
Yeah. Exactly. And once that system access is confirmed, we enter the final stage, post-exploitation. With Ring 0 privileges, their actions are basically untraceable and maximally impactful. They can gain maximum persistence, for example, installing a deep, hard-to-detect bootkit, or they can achieve maximum evasion by patching core operating system functions.
What kind of function?
A common target is patching kernel functions related to event tracing for Windows, or ETW. This effectively blinds key security logging mechanisms that your EDR tools rely on.
You mentioned earlier that standard kernel mitigations, things like control flow guard, CFG, or kernel address space layout randomization, KALSR, don't fully block this specific UAF attack. Why is that? That seems like a big deal.
It is, and it's crucial. These mitigations are designed to prevent attackers from reliably predicting where kernel structures reside in memory, that's KASLR, or from hijacking the code execution flow, which is CFG. However, in a UAF attack where the vulnerability is highly localized and relies on a very specific sequence of internal driver calls, especially in a filter driver, the attacker often has enough control over the specific memory allocation and deallocation cycle to bypass these generic defenses.
So they don't have to break the randomization, they just work around it.
In essence, yes. The UAF flaw provides a highly controlled environment where the attacker can manipulate the kernel's heap precisely enough to redirect execution flow or corrupt data without needing to fully defeat KASLR or CFG. This is what makes the exploit so reliable across different Windows versions, eliminating the need for complex version-specific tuning.
And this high reliability is what elevates that 7.8 CVSS score to an existential threat level for businesses, especially since the driver is on by default. We've established the technical details of the immediate threat. Now, let's pivot entirely to the business consequence. Why should the executive layer care so deeply about a memory safety issue in a single driver file?
The so what is devastatingly simple. This EOP flaw turns every successful initial access attempt, no matter how minor, into a catastrophic system compromise. It accelerates the attacker's timeline from weeks of probing to just minutes of takeover. The business problem is amplification and speed.
Let's quantify that. What are the key high-impact risks that stem directly from an attacker achieving system privileges via this kernel bug?
Okay, the first and most feared outcome is domain dominance and lateral movement. When system access is gained on an endpoint, the attacker's very first move is often to disable or patch the endpoint detection and response tool, the EDR, running on that machine.
Achieving immediate evasion.
Immediate evasion. Then they can dump credentials from memory.
How does that credential dumping work exactly, and why is it so much more effective after an EOP?
Well, tools like Mimikatz are notorious in this space. They harvest hashed passwords or even clear text credentials directly from the memory of critical processes like the Local Security Authority Subsystem Service, or LSAS. Now, this process is normally highly protected, but with system privileges, the attacker can access its memory, dump the credentials, and then use those harvested credentials to move laterally to other machines.
And from there, they're targeting
Critical assets like domain controllers. And that is how a single low-privilege foothold on one machine turns into total compromise of the entire Active Directory environment.
Beyond network control, what about the most visible financial threat?
That is ransomware and data theft. The sources confirm that exploitation of this specific vulnerability has been observed in actual ransomware campaigns. Gaining system privileges provides the necessary permissions to efficiently encrypt every file on the system, including critical business operation files, and to rapidly exfiltrate sensitive data before the encryption even begins.
And the cost of that is immense. We always look at the annual breach cost reports to try to gauge the impact.
And the numbers are relentless. IBM's latest reports confirmed that the average cost of a data breach is now exceeding $4.5 million. When systems are unpatched against actively exploited 0 days, the attacker's dwell time, the period they spend inside the network before they're detected, is maximized. And that dwell time directly amplifies the total financial cost of remediation, notification, and lost business.
This vulnerability also presents a unique, very modern risk because of the component it lives in. The Cloud Files mini filter driver.
That leads us to the risk of cloud integration and supply chain threats. Since this driver is the local bridge to cloud storage platforms, a compromised endpoint can become the pivot point for cloud data theft.
So if that machine has cached credentials?
Right. If that endpoint has cached credentials or access tokens for OneDrive, SharePoint, or other SaaS platforms, the attacker can leverage their new system access to steal them. Furthermore, in hybrid environments, this could facilitate unauthorized access to external partner networks, turning a local compromise into a critical supply chain incident.
We mentioned the CISA deadline. For enterprises, what are the direct compliance consequences of ignoring this flaw?
The regulatory implication is a massive hammer. CISA's addition of CVE 2025-62221 to the KEV catalog makes remediation mandatory for all U.S. federal civilian executive branch agencies under Binding Operational Directive 22-1.
And for private companies?
The consequence extends globally. If sensitive data like personally identifiable information, PII, or protected health information, PHI, is exposed due to this unpatched, actively exploited flaw, organizations face severe regulatory penalties under regimes like GDPR in Europe or HIPAA in the US. The fact that the exploit was active before the patch drastically weakens any defense argument of "we didn't know."
As defenders, we also have to grapple with the unknown unknowns surrounding a freshly patched zero-day. What are the key uncertainties making the defender's job so much harder right now?
I'd say three major uncertainties dominate. First, attribution. Who exactly is using this?
Right, state actor or criminal?
We don't have public confirmation on whether this exploitation is being led by high-end, state-sponsored advanced persistent threats, APTs, targeting specific governmental or defense entities, or if it has been weaponized by large opportunistic criminal groups using it to scale up their ransomware as a service operations. And the difference matters for prioritization.
And making it harder to hunt for those actors is the lack of specific evidence.
That's the second and most pressing uncertainty: IOC scarcity. Microsoft has maintained its policy of not releasing specific exploit details or indicators of compromise, IOCs, during this immediate remediation phase.
And without those IOCs,
Without specific file hashes or network traffic patterns or registry keys tied to the live exploit, proactive threat hunting is severely handicapped. You are forced to hunt for generic post-exploitation behavior rather than a specific attack signature.
which feeds directly into the third uncertainty, exploit proliferation.
Absolutely. Given the reliability and the relative simplicity of the core use-after-free mechanic, low complexity, high success rate, the probability that this exploit will be reverse-engineered, packaged, and sold on the dark web is extremely high. This high proliferation uncertainty means we could see widespread opportunistic impacts from low-skilled attackers extending well into 2026. The vulnerability is just too valuable to remain contained among only high-tier actors.
And finally, we have to acknowledge the broader context here, which is the sheer volume of security alerts contributing to patch fatigue.
This is the underlying operational challenge for every security team. While Microsoft finished 2025 with a lower monthly patch count in December, I think it was 70 vulnerabilities, the total patched CVE count for the year was around 12,275. Security teams are just overwhelmed.
And it's not just the quantity.
No, what's important is the shift in quality of the threats. Our sources note that elevation of privilege flaws made up about 50% of the December 2025 patches. The message is clear. Attackers are pivoting from complex RCEs to highly reliable EOP flaws, and that forces defenders to change their entire philosophy about endpoint security.
That's the perfect segue. Since we've established that the compromise is almost guaranteed once initial access is achieved, and that this EOP bug is highly reliable, what's the first line of defense we could deploy today? We've covered the technical architecture of the crisis and the high-stakes business risks. Now let's pivot entirely to the action plan. For the learner responsible for enterprise security, what is the immediate mandate for vulnerability control and risk mitigation?
The mandate is immediate layered defense and prioritizing patches based on actual risk, not just the CVSS score. Enterprises have to align with CISA's BOD 2201 guidance, which stresses rapid remediation of actively exploited flaws. This zero-day cannot be treated as a standard monthly patch.
Okay, let's start with the non-negotiable step, patching. What are the practical considerations for mass deployment under this kind of deadline pressure?
The urgency level is at maximum. Patch now. Enterprises must deploy the December 2025 cumulative updates immediately. This means pushing out updates like KB50.42434 for Windows 11 via their standard deployment tools, WSUS, Microsoft Intune, or SCCM.
What about testing?
Well, while security teams often require extensive testing in staging environments, the active exploitation status of this CVE means the risk of delaying deployment significantly outweighs the risk of some minor operational disruption. Speed is the primary metric here.
Given the December 30th federal deadline, not everything can be patched instantly in a large enterprise. How should teams prioritize their assets for this specific EOP flaw?
Asset prioritization is paramount. You have to target your high-value assets within 72 hours of the patch availability. Top priority goes to domain controllers and Active Directory servers. They are the ultimate targets of the EOP post-exploitation phase.
The crown jewels.
The crown jewels. Next are endpoints belonging to executive teams, IT administrators, and developer workstations. Those machines that hold the most privileged credentials or have access to proprietary source code and secrets. The goal is 100% patch compliance across these high-value assets by the deadline, and your patching metrics have to track this priority group specifically.
Since this flaw requires local and low privileges, what immediate access controls should be tightened to restrict the window of opportunity?
We have to double down on the principle of least privilege. Audit and enforce policies to limit local logins for standard users to only what is absolutely necessary. Any user who doesn't need interactive desktop access should have it revoked. Furthermore, you need to leverage application control mechanisms like App Blocker or Windows Defender application control to block the introduction and execution of unsigned drivers. This adds a critical layer of friction against follow-on attacks, where the attacker might try to load a malicious driver after they've exploited this.
Now, if an organization is facing critical operational difficulty or the patch deployment is failing, we discussed the possibility of disabling the problematic component. Where does that stand? Is that a realistic option?
It is a high-risk mitigation measure. It should only be considered as a temporary stopgap if patching is truly infeasible. The source material suggests organizations could disable unnecessary mini-filters by adjusting a specific registry key.
And that key is?
Setting CLDFLE flags equals 0x0 under the TELELDFLAL service registry path.
What are the specific hazards associated with touching a kernel driver registry key like that? Sounds risky.
The caution is immense. Because CLDLUT.ss is fundamentally integrated into how the Windows file system processes file operations, especially across network shares and high-latency environments. Disabling it without comprehensive, real-world testing could lead to system instability, application crashes, or data access disruptions.
So it's not a silver bullet.
Not at all. It's an emergency measure. The official tested patch must remain the primary non-negotiable goal. Any organization considering this must thoroughly test its entire application stack to prevent unanticipated blue screens or performance issues.
Okay, moving past the immediate fixes, let's transition to the layered risk mitigation strategies. This is the architectural defense that ensures a single successful exploit doesn't result in a total network loss. We have to assume the exploit will be chained with initial access vectors like phishing.
Exactly. Our defense has to shift from prevention only to rapid detection and robust containment.
Let's start with layer 1, endpoint monitoring and detection.
You need to deploy robust endpoint detection and response, or EDR, tools. Modern EDR systems have to move beyond just signature-based detection and focus on behavioral analysis. Specifically, they must be configured to detect anomalous behavior targeting kernel components. This means looking for things like a low-privilege user making unusual or malformed device I/O control calls, especially targeting the specific IOCTL used in the exploit, like that 0x220 CR0 we mentioned.
And what about after the escalation?
Post-exploitation, the critical detection point is observing token manipulation. That's when a low-privilege process attempts to elevate its security context to system. This is often flagged as a high-severity event in logging tools like Sysmin, specifically event ID 10.
Why is this layer so crucial given the IOC scarcity we discussed?
Because we lack specific IOCs, the EDR tool has to be tuned to spot the effect of the attack, not the signature of the exploit code. It provides the necessary detection gaps coverage and enables a rapid, proactive response to any unknown exploit variants that might emerge on the dark web. And that EDR must be integrated with your SIEM systems to ensure real-time alerting.
Okay, layer 2, network containment and isolation.
This relies entirely on the zero trust principle. You need to implement granular network segmentation, which is often referred to as microsegmentation. If an attacker gains system access on a single endpoint, a zero trust architecture enforced via solutions like Azure AD or Network Access Control Lists ensures that their lateral movement is blocked or severely limited.
What's the rationale there?
Containment. The rationale is containment. If the initial compromise is limited to a single VLAN or microsegment, the attacker can't immediately pivot to the domain controller or the core financial servers. They might own one machine, but they do not own the network.
So even if the EOP is successful, the blast radius is controlled.
Precisely. This buys the security team critical time that is otherwise lost to rapid lateral movement.
Layer 3, proactive threat hunting. If we can't wait for an alert, we have to actively look for compromise.
Yes. Given the IOC scarcity and the high reliability of the exploit, enterprises must conduct scheduled aggressive threat hunts. You need to leverage your telemetry data, your EDR logs, your network flows, and query them for generic indicators of compromise.
Like what?
Look for elevated processes being spawned by low-privilege users. Query for suspicious spike activity and kernel interaction before the patch deployment. Critically, your teams should operationalize the IARE ATT and CK framework, specifically focusing on the techniques related to privilege escalation, that's T21168, and defensive evasion, T1562.
And the ultimate goal of hunting in this context.
The rationale here is to mitigate the uncertainty caused by IOC scarcity. We have to operate under the assumption of compromise. If an attacker successfully exploited this flaw before the patch was deployed, they might already have deep persistence. Hunting forces us to find the evidence of that post-exploitation activity, the hidden backdoors, the modified security settings, before the attacker launches their full campaign.
Layer 4, user and asset hardening. This is about making that system access less valuable in the first place.
Hardening is essential, particularly focused on memory protection. Enterprises should immediately enable Microsoft features like Credential Guard and LSA protection.
Explain LSA protection. What does that actually do?
LSA protection, or Local Security Authority protection, is a mechanism in Windows designed to prevent unauthorized processes from accessing the memory of the crucial Local Security Authority Subsystem Service, LSAS. By enabling it, often via registry or group policy, you make tools like Mimikatz far less effective. Because even if the attacker achieves system access via this CVE, they can't easily dump credentials from LSAS memory. That cripples their ability to gain domain admin access and reduces the immediate value proposition of the EOP.
Good. What else?
Additionally, restrict PowerShell execution and implement application whitelisting, as these are common living off the land tools used immediately following privilege escalation.
And finally, the essential last resort, backup and recovery.
This is non-negotiable business continuity planning. You have to maintain immutable off-site backups that are air-gapped, or at least logically separated from the production environment. Given that this vulnerability has been tied to active ransomware campaigns, regular tested recovery procedures are vital. Recovery testing should be conducted quarterly, ensuring that your organization can rapidly revert to a known good state following a catastrophic data loss or encryption event. That neutralizes the final, most financially damaging step of the attack chain.
So the long-term strategy requires tracking success. What metrics should enterprises be reporting to the board to show they've handled this crisis effectively?
Success is defined by compliance and speed. Aim for patch compliance metrics greater than 95% on high-value assets within the mandated windows. And internally, focus on reducing your mean time to detect, or MTTD, for anomalous kernel behavior to under 24 hours. Furthermore, moving into 2026, enterprises must begin advocating for and actively deploying enhanced kernel hardening features like Windows Hypervisor Enforced Code Integrity, or HVCI.
And what does HVCI fundamentally change about the kernel security model?
HVCI uses the built-in virtualization capabilities of modern CPUs to run the kernel integrity check processes in a highly secured container called Virtual Secure Mode, or VSM. This means that even if an attacker achieves a kernel-write primitive via a flaw like this one, the integrity of the kernel code itself is continuously verified and protected by the hypervisor. It makes it fundamentally harder to hijack execution flow or load malicious drivers. It's an architectural shift that raises the cost and complexity of all kernel exploitation.
This detailed action plan really shows that addressing CVE 2025-62221 is not just about compliance. It's a litmus test for the resilience of the entire enterprise security architecture in the face of these reliable zero-day threats. We've had a comprehensive deep dive today. Let's synthesize the key takeaways regarding CVE 2025-62221.
This is a critical, actively exploited use-after-free flaw residing in the Windows Cloud Files mini-filter driver, cldflt.ss. Its severity comes from its ubiquity. It's on by default in modern Windows, and its reliability. It requires only low privileges and no user interaction to execute, instantly jumping a low-level access to full system control.
And achieving system allows attackers to instantly disable EDR, dump credentials via processes like LSAS, and achieve domain dominance, making it an immediate threat in ransomware and advanced persistent threat campaigns. So immediate patching and rapid deployment, prioritized by asset value, are non-negotiable due to the CISOs listing and that federal deadline.
But the patch alone is insufficient. Because of the scarcity of IOCs, defense has to rely on layered mitigation, robust behavioral EDR monitoring for token manipulation, strict network microsegmentation to contain lateral movement, and aggressive threat hunting for the results of potential pre-patch compromises.
And enterprises must also harden assets using features like LSA protection and move toward implementing HVCI.
Right.
We've seen that as 2025 wrapped up, the total volume of vulnerabilities might have been massive, but the quality of threats, particularly actively exploited zero-day EOP flaws, is unambiguously rising. This shift in attack strategy demands a corresponding shift in our defense philosophy.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner, to carry forward. Historically, security philosophy focused on maintaining a strong perimeter to prevent initial access. However, given the persistent popularity and reliability of kernel-level privilege escalation flaws, like the one we saw in the Cloud Files mini filter driver, businesses must accept a fundamental change in mindset. The question for 2026 is this: how must enterprise security philosophy shift to prioritize containment and rapid response, operating under the assumption that system-level access on an endpoint is not just possible but inevitable, and that the integrity of the endpoint itself must be continuously verified?
That reframing of endpoint integrity versus perimeter defense is a vital conversation for the year ahead. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.